They didn't even call, just a late-night text the night before Thanksgiving. "Don't come. Zack isn't comfortable. Let's keep the peace." That was it. No greeting, no apology. I had booked the restaurant, paid the deposit, planned the wine pairings. I had arranged it all, and yet somehow I was the one excluded. Not because I failed them, but because I'd always been the one who held everything together. And maybe they got too used to it. Maybe they stopped seeing me. Or maybe this was never about comfort. Maybe it was about erasing the one person who saw too much. The text came through at 10:47 p.m. I was brushing my teeth, getting ready for bed, when the screen of my phone lit up on the bathroom counter. I didn't rush to check it. I wasn't expecting anything urgent, just last-minute Thanksgiving logistics, maybe a question about the side dishes or seating chart. But when I picked up the phone, I froze. "Rachel, please don't come tomorrow. Zack isn't comfortable. Let's keep the peace." 3 sentences, no greeting, no explanation, no apology, just a soft digital shove out the door. For a moment I stood there motionless, toothbrush in hand, mint foam dissolving on my tongue. Then I rinsed, wiped my face dry, and stared at my reflection under the harsh vanity lights. There was no surprise in my expression. Only that familiar tightness behind the eyes, the ache of having seen it coming, but hoping I was wrong. I had made the reservation 3 weeks ago, chosen the restaurant halfway between my apartment and their house, close enough for Uncle Drew to get there from the nursing home. I'd called ahead to confirm wine pairings, special dietary needs, even reserved 2 high chairs for Zack's kids. I paid the deposit myself. They never asked me to, but they never offered either. It was just understood that Rachel would take care of it, like always. And now, less than 24 hours before the dinner, I was uninvited. Not by some accident, not because of weather or overbooking, but because my presence made Zack uncomfortable. I didn't reply to the message. I didn't call. I just walked into the kitchen, turned on the light, and sat down at the counter. My laptop was already there, slightly dusty, unopened for weeks. I flipped it open and clicked through the folders until I found it. Family expenses, do not share, XLSX. It started as a way to keep track of little things. $50 for gas when Dad's truck broke down, $100 for Mom's prescription copay. The missed rent Zack forgot 3 months in a row, but it had grown, quietly, steadily, into something else. A record, a history, maybe even a confession. I hadn't looked at it in months, but the numbers were still there, waiting. 2009, mortgage hold, $5,600. 2012, Zack's DUI legal fees, $2,800. 2015, HVAC repair, paid directly to the vendor, $3,400. 2017, tuition for Zack's second attempt at trade school, $1,100. Line after line, vet bills for the dog Zack adopted, then left with me. Grocery receipts, birthday trips, cell phone plans, and at the bottom, a red cell flagged, second mortgage, activity unknown, flagged June. I didn't even remember flagging that. Maybe something Mom mentioned offhand. Maybe a letter I saw in Dad's garage. I'd meant to follow up. I hadn't. Now I stared at that cell like it could answer the question I was too afraid to ask. Why now? Why, after everything, was I the one being erased? I wasn't dramatic. I didn't yell. I didn't air dirty laundry. I showed up. I filled in the gaps. I made things work. And somehow all that effort had made it easier to push me aside because I'd always made it easy. That was the trade. They got the chaos, the emotion, the failures. I got to be the steady one, the one who kept the wheels turning, the one who didn't need anything, the one who didn't make noise. But standing in my silent kitchen, that steadiness felt less like strength and more like cement, hard, cold, and impossible to move. I scrolled through the spreadsheet again. Each number was a breadcrumb leading back to every moment I'd picked up the slack without complaint. And for what? So I could be told, via text, that I made my brother uncomfortable. I closed the laptop, not gently, but not slamming it either, just enough force to make the keys whisper against the screen. Then I stood, turned off the light, and let the room return to darkness. The next morning I woke up before my alarm, not out of habit, but because sleep had vanished sometime around 3 and never returned. The apartment was quiet, early sunlight filtering through the blinds, catching dust in the air. I made coffee without thinking and sat down at the kitchen counter again, the laptop already open. The spreadsheet glowed on the screen, rows upon rows of tiny numbers, colour-coded in subtle shades of sacrifice. I scrolled back to the beginning. 2008. The year the market collapsed. I was 24, barely out of college, working contract jobs that paid late, if at all. I was still splitting rent with 2 roommates and stretching groceries with canned beans and discount rice. I had no business helping anyone. But Mum had called, voice shaking. The bank sent a letter. We're behind. Your dad won't talk about it. I borrowed a car and drove home that weekend. Found Dad in the backyard with a wrench too small for the railing he was pretending to fix. He never looked up. We're fine, he said. They weren't. The house was 3 payments behind. A second mortgage had been taken out, quietly, to help Zack with tuition after his first trade program fell apart. The paperwork was hidden in a drawer under a church bulletin and expired coupons. I didn't ask, I just paid it, wired the money, cleared the slate, no ceremony, no lecture. I didn't even tell them right away. A week later, Mum called and said, "You shouldn't have, but thank you." And then added, "Coffee's on if you're ever in the neighbourhood." That was all. I think I believed back then that being needed was the same as being wanted, that if I kept showing up, eventually someone would look up and see me standing there, but they never did. 2010, new tyres for Dad's truck, $600. 2012, Zack's accident, insurance lapse, $1,700. 2014, oral surgery for Mum, $3,800. 2016, bail out Zack's overdraft 6 times, total $2,100. 2018, emergency rent when Zack lost another job, $200. 2020, down payment on a used car after Dad's transmission blew, $4,000. The numbers told the story better than I ever could. I wasn't a daughter. I was a fund, a buffer, a backup plan. And yet, despite it all, I remembered a night in 2011, sitting at the kitchen table with Mum. She had just come back from the dentist, mouth swollen, trying to sip broth from a mug. I was going over her bills, organising receipts, and she touched my hand gently. "When this is all behind us," she whispered, "I'll make it right. We'll pay you back. I promise." I believed her. Not because she meant it, maybe she did in the moment, but because I wanted to believe that all of this had an endpoint, that it wasn't endless. But the day never came, and the more I helped, the less anyone seemed to remember there had been help at all. It just became the way things were. I stepped in, they stepped back. I carried, they coasted. And over time, the idea that I might say no became unthinkable. It wasn't just ungrateful, it was structural. Somewhere along the way, they'd built a system. One where Zack got 2nd, 3rd, 5th chances, where my parents prioritised his comfort over my presence, where my silence became the mortar, holding it all together. And maybe that's why the disinvitation didn't come as a shock. It was just the next logical step in a long pattern. I wasn't being excluded for something I did wrong. I was being erased because I was no longer useful in silence. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I saved the file under a new name, What They Didn't Count, and closed the laptop for good. When I was 5, my mother told me I was the steady one. She said it with pride, like it was the highest compliment a child could receive. I'd just come back inside after helping Dad in the yard, my hands sticky with sap from the pine cones I insisted on collecting. Zack was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, wailing because he didn't want to eat green beans. Mum handed me a towel for my hands and smiled. "See?" she said, brushing hair from my face. You're the one I never have to worry about. At 5, I thought that meant I was special. That being the one who didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't spill juice on the couch made me good. It never occurred to me that not worrying also meant not noticing. Zack, 2 years younger, was a whirlwind. He threw tantrums so loud the neighbours checked in. He had allergies that required special meals and a stubborn streak so strong he once refused to wear shoes to preschool for a week. He was fragile, sensitive, full of big feelings, and the world adjusted around him. Schedules bent, rules shifted, tones softened, and I adapted. I made my own lunch, found my own socks, learned not to interrupt. If Zack needed the quiet, I gave it. If he needed the attention, I disappeared. At the time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like love, like being dependable meant being needed. But looking back, I wonder if I mistook invisibility for security. One summer afternoon when I was 11, I caught Mum at the dining table sorting bills. She didn't hear me come in. I stood frozen in the hallway as I watched her open my blue porcelain piggy bank, the one Grandma gave me when I was 6, and pour the quarters into a Ziploc bag. I had been saving for months to buy a second-hand bike. There must have been $30 in that bank. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, just zipped the bag, slid it into her purse, and folded the electricity bill on top. I never said anything. The next day, she brought home groceries and smiled like nothing had happened. Zack's prescription was more than we expected, she said, but everything's covered now. The bike never came, and I never asked again. That was the first time I remember feeling that steadiness wasn't just expected of me, it was assumed. I wasn't praised for handling disappointment. I was denied the option of reacting to it. Zack broke things. I picked them up. Zack failed. I compensated. Zack forgot. I remembered. He was the story, and I was the spine holding the pages in place. It's easy to romanticize resilience. People love calling strong girls mature for their age. They hand out gold stars for being low maintenance. But no one asks what gets left behind when a child decides, too early, to stop needing things. Sometimes I wonder if Mom even remembers that piggy bank, if she ever thought about what it meant to me, or if she just saw it as another pot to borrow from, temporary, insignificant, guaranteed to replenish. That night, I dug through an old storage bin in the hall closet and found the bank, still chipped on one ear from when I dropped it down the stairs in 4th grade. I held it in my hands for a long time, empty, hollow, still smiling. It occurred to me then that my whole childhood might have been like that, shiny on the outside, cracked underneath, designed to hold, not to be held. I was 24 when the crash came, fresh out of college, juggling 3 remote gigs with unreliable pay. My roommates and I lived on frozen waffles and shared Wi-Fi stolen from the coffee shop next door. I didn't have much, but I had a plan: save a little, invest what I could, keep moving forward. Then Mum called. Her voice was tight, stretched thin between panic and apology. "We're a little behind," she said, "but it's just temporary. Your father, he doesn't want to talk about it." I asked how far behind. There was silence, then a click. She'd hung up. That weekend, I borrowed a car and drove 5 hours home. The house looked the same, white shutters, chipped mailbox, but there was a weight in the air I hadn't felt before. Dad was outside fiddling with a broken gate. He didn't look up when I parked. "We're fine," he muttered, before I even opened my mouth. But they weren't. 3 mortgage payments behind. The utilities 1 month from shut-off, and a second mortgage, quietly taken out 2 years prior, to cover Zack's failed trade school attempt. It was all there, in a manila folder in the kitchen drawer, wedged between expired coupons and church bulletins. I didn't confront them. I just sat at the dining table, opened my laptop, and called the bank. I gave them my routing number, cleared the past due balance, paid the fees, bought them time. A week later, Mom called. Her voice was lighter, almost cheerful. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "But thank you." Then she added with that infuriating calmness. You know, you really shouldn't have. I waited for something else, for acknowledgement, for apology. But that was it. You shouldn't have. A statement dressed like concern, but stitched with guilt. It wasn't a thank you, it was a deflection. And that became the pattern. Every time I stepped in, they responded with passive discomfort. Never outrage, never gratitude, just that low hum of unease, as if my help was both expected and resented. A few months after I paid off the mortgage debt, I came home for Christmas. The tree was up, gifts already under it. Mum handed me a present wrapped in gold paper. Inside was a coffee mug that said "World's Best Backup Plan." She laughed when I opened it. "We thought it was funny," she said, nudging Zack, who gave a sheepish grin. "You're always saving the day." I smiled. What else could I do? But something inside me cracked. I wasn't the hero of this story. I was the fallback. The invisible hand that patched the holes so they could pretend the roof was fine. That mug ended up in the back of my cabinet, behind the mixing bowls I rarely used. I couldn't throw it away, but I couldn't look at it either. Years later, while organising papers for my taxes, I found something odd, an envelope addressed to my parents from a private lender I didn't recognise. The date was recent, too recent. The loan amount matched suspiciously close to what I remembered from the second mortgage I had already paid down. I didn't ask, not then. But it festered. Later I would discover they had refinanced again. Quietly, without telling me. And this time they hadn't used the money for Zack's tuition or emergency repairs. They used it to pay off credit cards, buy new furniture, and, I suspected, cover yet another one of Zack's stumbles, though they never admitted it. That moment planted the seed. This wasn't disorganisation, it wasn't oversight, it was a system, a quiet, calculated way of shifting weight onto the one person least likely to drop it. And I had trained them to believe I'd always catch it. Thanksgiving morning, I cancelled the reservation. 24 seats, 2 high chairs, 4 bottles of wine I'd already paid for. I ate the full cost, left a generous tip in the comments field, and closed the tab. I didn't want anyone accusing me of being petty over money. This wasn't about money. It hadn't been for years. Then I opened my email. Subject line, "Since I won't be at dinner. Attached, family expenses. Do not share. LSX." I stared at the cursor blinking beside the note I had typed. "Since I won't be joining you tonight, I thought you should have this. It's everything I've covered since 2008. For context, I'm closing the tab. No accusations, no rant. Just the truth, line by line, in cold, hard numbers. I hit send. The stillness afterward felt hollow, like standing in an empty room after everyone else has gone home. I poured coffee into the backup plan mug, the irony too bitter now to ignore. Took one sip, dumped the rest, washed the mug, dried it slowly, and set it behind the mixer, where no one would ever reach for it again. The first voicemail came around noon. Dad, measured, mild. "Rachel, your mother's upset. Zack didn't mean anything by it. You blindsided us. That's not how we do things in this family." He hung up without saying goodbye. The second was Mum, her voice thick with guilt and something like wounded pride. "Sweetheart, you know how your brother is. Sensitive. It's been a rough year for him. Don't let one misunderstanding ruin everything we've built." She didn't mention the file. By evening, Zack had texted twice. The first, "Seriously? You're keeping score now?" The second, 5 minutes later, "Hope your money keeps you warm." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The file said more than I ever could. But it was Zack's third message that twisted something inside me. "You've always been a snake. Just took this long to shed your skin." Snake. It wasn't just angry. It was venomous. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the delete button. Not because I didn't expect the backlash, but because in that moment I realised something deeper. This wasn't a reaction, it was a revelation. He hadn't said it in a fit of rage. He'd meant it. He saw me not as the sister who bailed him out, covered his rent, fed his dog, but as a threat, a rival, a danger. The mask had slipped. And maybe that was the point of the spreadsheet all along, not to expose my generosity, but to reveal theirs. They had never seen me as part of the family circle. Not really. I was a resource, a safety net, a problem solver. And the moment I stopped playing that role, they turned. No one asked why I sent the file. No one asked how much I'd given. Only why now. Why this way? Why I couldn't have just let it slide. That stung the most. Not the disappointment, not the scolding, but the assumption that I was still the one expected to keep it all together. I turned off my phone, not out of defiance, out of clarity. There would be no explanations, no walking it back. The ledger had broken. And maybe, for the first time, that was the point. The envelope had been sitting on my mantel for over a month. Cream-coloured thick paper, no return address. My name, Rachel, written in my father's tight, uneven handwriting. I'd found it one evening wedged behind the ceramic clock I never used. It looked formal, almost ceremonial, like something you'd get from a lawyer or a funeral home. I didn't open it. At the time, I was too tired, too wary of what it might contain. Another bill, maybe. Or worse, another request for help wrapped in guilt. But now, after Zack's text, after the cold silence from my parents, I pulled it down. I slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the papers inside. There were printouts, bank statements, transaction histories, a few annotated notes in Dad's handwriting. But what struck me wasn't what was there, it was what it suggested. The first document showed small withdrawals, $60 here, $85 there. Then a larger one, $1,200 marked repairs, though the address listed wasn't my parents' house. It was an apartment building on the east side of town, Zack's. Another transfer, $350, to a boutique I remembered Zack tagging on Instagram. Then came the emails, one in particular printed and underlined. A message from a financial advisor warning about the dangers of rolling over a mortgage loan for a third time. My father's response was short. She says she's handling it. Rachel doesn't need to know. She, my mother, the one who always played the overwhelmed, helpless caretaker. The one who let me believe Dad had made the financial mess, and she'd merely tolerated it. The one who'd stood next to me all these years pretending to be grateful. Now I saw the truth. Dad hadn't sent me that envelope for clarity. He'd sent it as a lifeline, quiet, passive, but deliberate. His guilt kept him silent, but this was his way of speaking. And in doing so, he'd exposed something deeper. Mom hadn't just turned a blind eye. She'd orchestrated it. She managed the paperwork. She redirected the accounts. She made the calls. She let Dad absorb the blame, let me carry the weight, and kept Zack comfortably clueless. And she'd trained me, over decades, to never question it. Every "you shouldn't have," every "we'll make it right," wasn't avoidance. It was control, polished, familiar, effective. I sat there, the papers spread across the table like a puzzle I hadn't realised I'd been assembling for years. The pieces were all there, the late-night calls, the buried bank statements, the missing thank yous. They hadn't just leaned on me. They'd built their lives around the assumption that I would never say no. I was the default donor, the permanent plan B, the living line of credit they never applied for, but always withdrew from. And worse, Mum had made sure it stayed that way. Dad had tried, in his own subdued way, to signal the truth. But she had reinforced the roles. She soothed my questions, masked the debts, stoked Zack's resentment when I pulled back, all with a smile, a pat on the hand, a mug that read "backup plan." And suddenly, everything clicked. I hadn't been left out of Thanksgiving because Zack felt uncomfortable. I'd been excluded because I'd become dangerous, because I saw too much, because I'd stopped playing along. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and sealed it shut. This wasn't about hurt feelings. This was a system, and I was finally done being part of it. Miriam Kane's office was tucked inside an old Victorian house just off the town square, the kind with creaky floors and amber windows that made the sunlight feel like honey. I sat across from her in a leather chair that had seen decades of heavy conversations. She didn't waste time with small talk. I handed her the envelope, then the spreadsheet, then the bank statements, the voicemail transcript from the loan officer, and a printed copy of Zack's text messages. I laid them out like puzzle pieces across her desk, not saying a word. She read in silence. No eyebrow raises, no sharp intakes of breath, just the steady glide of her pen underlining, circling, annotating. When she finally looked up, she didn't ask why I was there. She just asked what I wanted to do. I want them to be safe, I said, but I also want to be free. She nodded once, leaned back, and tapped the desk lightly with her pen. What you're describing isn't just financial misuse, she said. It's a patterned system of emotional leverage, and you've been underwriting it for years. I said nothing. I didn't need to. She opened a legal pad and started drawing diagrams, trust structures, clauses, protective locks and irrevocable terms. Her tone was matter-of-fact, surgical in its precision. We can purchase the home under a private trust, she said. You'll fund it, but the ownership will be held by the entity. Your parents retain lifetime residency rights, but they lose the ability to borrow against it. If anyone tries, family, bank, even a co-signer, it triggers a legal freeze, immediate lockdown. It felt cold, harsh, a line drawn in permanent ink, but it also felt like oxygen. Miriam paused, pen hovering. There's another option, she said. You don't have to do any of this. You can walk away, completely. No legal obligation, no moral one either, from where I'm standing. And I looked at her, really looked at her. Sharp, composed, no nonsense, the kind of woman who'd seen too many daughters like me try to save families that didn't want saving. I know, I said, but I'm not doing it for them. And I wasn't, not entirely. I was doing it because I needed closure, not the kind that came with apologies or explanations, but structure, something that couldn't be twisted or diluted. A boundary written in law, not love. Miriam flipped to a clean page. We'll draw up the trust this week. The title transfers with funds from your asset account. They'll be notified but won't have access. You'll retain administrative authority, but will appoint a third-party trustee to oversee future disputes. That keeps you out of the firing line. And Zack? I asked. She didn't flinch. He's not part of the trust. No access, no provision, not even as a residual beneficiary. A small twist of guilt curled in my stomach, then faded. Miriam watched me for a moment, then said, softer this time, You know you don't owe them your silence anymore. I nodded, but inside I knew I might never get loud. Instead, I would build the quietest boundary possible, and this time it would hold. We met at the house on a Thursday morning. It was cold but clear, the kind of winter day where the air stings your skin, but the sun still feels sharp. Miriam arrived early, files in hand, notepad tucked under her arm, and a calm efficiency that made everything feel inevitable. The kitchen looked exactly as I remembered, same pine cabinets, same off-white tile. The ceramic clock above the stove still ran 5 minutes fast. A few brittle leaves skittered across the back porch as we stepped inside. My parents were already seated at the table. Dad wore his brown corduroy jacket. His Timex watch peeked from under the cuff, the one I bought him at 16 with babysitting money and a coupon from the Sears catalogue. He fiddled with the strap as we walked in. Mom had made coffee. Of course she had. It sat untouched beside her, cooling in a white porcelain mug with faint floral trim. Miriam set the documents on the table, flipped them open, and began walking us through the pages. Title transfer, residency clause, non-borrow restriction, dispute protocols, trustee assignment. Her voice never rose. Her hands never trembled. Neither did mine. No one interrupted. No one argued. My father read each page silently, slowly. My mother nodded through most of it until we reached the residency clause. This guarantees we won't be forced out, she asked. I looked at her, steady. It guarantees you'll never lose this house, I said. But you can't borrow against it again. She nodded, once, then glanced back down, pen between her fingers. It was the quietest betrayal I'd ever been a part of. When we reached the final page, she paused, just long enough for the air to shift. Then she asked, "So, this is it? You're cutting us off?" Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was something stranger, like disbelief wrapped in wounded pride. "Rachel," she said again, softer now, "are you going to leave us like this?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't need them anymore. Instead, I picked up the pen and signed my name. The ink flowed clean and sharp across the page. A signature that didn't shake, didn't hesitate. Mum blinked, looked down at the document like it might shift in meaning if she stared hard enough. But she didn't speak again. Miriam slid the final folder closed and reached for the notary stamp. The click of it sealing the deal echoed in the room. Then in the stillness that followed, I felt it, that almost imperceptible shift in weight. Dad looked at me, really looked. And for a moment I thought he might say something. His mouth opened, then closed. His fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the folder, not out of restlessness, out of habit, like he needed to release the words but had forgotten how. His eyes held mine a beat too long, full of something, grief, maybe, or regret, or the knowledge of all the things he should have said, should have done, but never did. But in the end, he said nothing, and that silence told me everything. I stood, pushed in my chair, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the wind picked up again, tossing a few dead leaves across the driveway. Inside, the document sat signed and sealed. And for the first time, the house was mine, but not in the way it used to be. Now it was protected, from them and from me. The knock came just after 8, sharp, deliberate, 3 evenly spaced raps, like he'd practiced them on the walk over. I already knew who it was before I checked the peephole, Zack. He stood in the hallway, soaked through from the rain, hood down, sweatshirt clinging to his frame. No rage on his face, just that sour look he wore when things didn't go his way, a mix of pity, bitterness and confusion, the bruised ego of a man who believed the world owed him something. I opened the door halfway, didn't invite him in, just waited. "So that's it," he said, arms crossed. "You just buy the house and cut us all out?" His voice was steady, but it trembled around the edges, like he was trying to rehearse a script he didn't quite believe. I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped aside just long enough to reach the table behind me and grab the folder I had left there. I'd prepared it days ago, just in case. I handed it to him, already flipped to page 4. "Beneficiary restrictions," I said. He glanced down, didn't really read, just held it like a prop. "You could have told me," he said, voice lower now. "You didn't have to be sneaky about it." I let the silence sit between us for a moment before speaking. "I did tell you," I said. "Every time I paid your rent, every time I cleared your overdraft, you just didn't hear it, because I never yelled." He took a step forward inside the threshold now, but I didn't move back. We stood there, close enough to feel the damp air rising off his clothes. "So what now?" he said. "You're done with me?" I looked him in the eye. "No," I said quietly. "You were done with me the moment you stood by and let them disinvite me from a table I paid for." He blinked once, then again, looked away. "It was Mom's idea," he muttered. "It was your silence," I replied. The weight of that sentence seemed to settle in the room like fog. He shifted, uncomfortable, arms dropping to his sides. "You know what your problem is," he said finally. "You think being useful makes you important, but you were never the first choice, Rachel. You were just the backup." I didn't flinch. "I know," I said. But then he leaned in, his voice dropping further. "You were the plan B, Always, in case something broke, in case I couldn't handle it, in case they needed someone to blame. You think they loved you for being stable? No, they counted on it. You were the safety net they didn't have to ask for. He let that hang in the air like a curse, like he expected it to wound. It didn't. It clarified. He saw me not as a sister, but as infrastructure, as a fallback, as insurance. You're wrong, I said finally. They didn't count on me because I was stable. They counted on me because I never said no. He looked down at the folder in his hands. The pages were starting to curl from the moisture in the air. Then he looked up at me again. What do I even have left? I held his gaze. Whatever you choose to build. He didn't speak again, just turned, slow and stiff, and walked down the hallway. His wet shoes squeaked on the tile, no slamming door, no parting shot, just the soft sound of departure. And for the first time I didn't feel guilty, only light. The voicemail came on a Tuesday morning. I nearly deleted it before listening, assuming it was another robocall or a misdialed number. But something about the voice, gravelly, Midwestern kind, made me pause. Hi, this is Tom over at Fairview Storage. We're clearing out some abandoned units, and we found a box with your name on it. Looks like paperwork, might be worth a look. Fairview. That was the street my parents lived on before they moved to the house I'd just placed into the trust. I hadn't thought about their old storage rental in years. I drove out that afternoon. The air smelled of dust and damp concrete. Tom met me at the gate, worn denim shirt and keyring jangling on his hip. Didn't open it, he said. Figured you'd want to. The box was medium-sized, soft at the corners, my name written in fading black marker, Rachel B. I lifted the lid and coughed. Old receipts, bank statements, torn envelopes, curled folders, all in Mom's organisational style, barely held together, but deceptively methodical. But beneath them I saw something more deliberate, 2 spiral-bound notebooks. I recognised Zack's handwriting instantly, slanted, angular, always in black pen. I flipped one open, half expecting teen angst or bad poetry, but it wasn't that. It was logistics. Pages of numbers, payment strategies, due dates, overdraft gaps, written like tactical plans. Each section marked with headers. If card 3 maxes out, use Claire's backup. Request extension, then let Rachel offer. One page had a small star next to it. A scrawled note in the margin read, Ask Mum about using Rachel's trust. She won't say no if it's for them. I read it twice, then again. My hands shook, not with rage, but with something colder, like all the blood had pooled somewhere deep in my gut. This wasn't just passive dependence. This was manipulation, strategic, rehearsed, intentional. He'd planned it. Not just to lean on me, but to build situations that required me to step in, that made my help feel inevitable. And Mum? She had known. The note didn't say Mum might help. It said ask Mum about using Rachel's trust. The implication was clear. She wasn't an accessory. She was a partner. I dug deeper in the box, pulling out more folders. One had apartment applications, Zack's name, but my email listed as guarantor. Fake income statements. Emergency contacts I never agreed to. He hadn't just anticipated my support. He forged it. My name had been currency. And no one had told me. Tom hovered nearby, watching my face. He didn't ask questions, just stood with his hands in his pockets, a quiet presence among the ruins. I nodded once. Thanks for keeping it safe. Back home, I spread the contents across my kitchen table. Papers, notebooks, screenshots I'd printed from old messages. It was all there. Evidence not of one mistake, but a pattern. Not an accident, but a strategy. I stared at Zack's handwriting, the loops and arrows and casual certainty, and I remembered the last thing he'd said to me, you were the plan B. Always. He hadn't said it with cruelty, he'd said it with belief, because to him I wasn't a person, I was a fallback option, a feature of the family's infrastructure. I took photos of every page, then carefully resealed the notebooks and slid them back into the box. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just moved with the kind of stillness that comes when clarity hardens into resolve. It wasn't just that they had used me, it was that they had planned to. And now I was done being part of the plan. I met with Miriam the next morning. I didn't call ahead, I just showed up. Box in hand, notebooks inside, documents fanned out like a silent testimony. She didn't blink when she saw me. Just led me into her office and cleared the desk with one efficient motion. I need to revise the trust, I said, my voice level. I need it airtight, no exceptions. Miriam nodded, already reaching for her legal pad. No cosigns, no name-based authority. I want triggers on every clause. If someone tries to borrow, sell, refinance, manipulate access, lock it down. She wrote quickly, efficient, familiar. Any communication attempts from within the family? None worth responding to, I said. She looked up, pen paused. This is going to sever things, maybe permanently. I know, I replied. That's the point. She didn't smile, but she looked respectful, like someone who'd seen enough daughters walk in carrying broken foundations and finally decide to stop rebuilding. We worked for hours, reviewed every section, removed my name from all lines of liability, appointed an external trustee with no familial ties, just clean, unbiased oversight. We layered protection on top of protection, clause on top of clause. When we were done, Miriam leaned back in her chair, tapped the file once, and said, "This isn't just a trust anymore, it's a shield." I exhaled. Not relief, not satisfaction, just steadiness, the kind I chose for myself. She watched me carefully, then asked, "How do you feel?" I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window. The winter sky hung low, grey and quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a car honked, life moved on. Then I said softly, "Like I finally did something for me." She nodded once. No guilt? I thought about it. The house, the loans, the emails, Zack's scribbled plans, my mother's silence. I thought about how often I had put my needs second, my wants last. How many times I had said yes before even hearing the request, and I realized with startling clarity I didn't feel guilty at all. I felt clean, like a room swept out after years of dust. "They made the rules," I said. I just stopped playing. Miriam slid the new documents across the table. I signed without flinching. The pen didn't shake, the ink didn't smear, the name, Rachel Barnes, held. She stamped the final page, slid it into the secure folder, and stood. It's done. And for the first time in my life, so was I. Not done in bitterness, done in boundary. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to my mother, not to Zack, not even to my father, though I thought of him as I typed, his quiet sighs, his unfinished sentences. No. This letter was for the trustee, a man I had never met, never spoken to, chosen by Miriam from a vetted list of professionals with no family ties and no emotional entanglements. His job wasn't to understand me. It was to protect the boundaries I had finally built, but I still needed to explain. So I wrote, "Dear trustee, you'll find enclosed all relevant documentation to support the terms of the amended trust, including detailed records of prior financial abuse, emotional coercion, and unauthorized use of my personal credit history. The individuals named in the residency clause have been granted occupancy out of decency, not obligation. They are not to be consulted, empowered, or given access to any decision-making authority regarding the trust or its assets. This trust exists because I spent 15 years being the person everyone leaned on, not because they asked, but because they assumed I wouldn't say no. What began as help became habit. What began as family became burden. What began as love became debt. I don't want revenge. I don't want confrontation. I want peace." I sat back and read it once, twice, then added, "Please consider this letter my final communication on the matter. If they contact you, respond with silence. That silence is my decision. And for the first time in my life, silence wasn't something I suffered through. It was something I chose. It wasn't avoidance, it was design. I printed the letter, signed it, scanned and uploaded a digital copy into the archive Miriam had set up for me. I placed the hard copy in a sealed envelope, addressed to the trustee's office, and set it on my entryway table. It would be mailed tomorrow. But the decision had already arrived. I stared at it for a long moment, this plain white envelope containing a lifetime of turning points, and realised something strange. I didn't feel abandoned anymore. I felt released. All this time I'd thought I was the one being left behind, skipped over, pushed out, forgotten. But the truth was far simpler and far more freeing. I hadn't been discarded. I had stepped out of the role, out of the pattern, out of the exhausting loop of trying to earn love by being indispensable. It had never been about being needed. It had been about being used. And now I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even numb. I was done. Done letting guilt shape my choices. Done confusing silence with shame. Done holding together what others refused to mend. The boundary wasn't just legal now. It was emotional. And it would hold. Because this silence wasn't the kind that crushes, it was the kind that clears. The first thing I did was open my calendar. It was a quiet Friday evening, the kind where the light outside fades slow and soft, and even the traffic seems to take a breath. I sat at my desk, steaming mug beside me, and pulled up the digital planner I'd been using for years. Click, delete. Dad's cholesterol checkup, monthly reminder. Click, delete. Mum's dental cleaning, every 6 months. Click, delete. Zack's lease renewal alert, annually on March 3rd. Click, cancel. Mother's Day flower delivery subscription. Click, cancel. Just because e-card reminder for Mum, second Wednesday of each month. Each click felt like peeling off a layer I didn't know I'd been wearing, not out of spite, not out of bitterness, just release. I paused when I got to the yearly Thanksgiving prep checklist. It had been in there since 2013. Recipes, seating arrangements, dietary notes, wine pairings, kids' corner activities. Delete. No system asked if I was sure. No pop-up demanded a second confirmation. It was gone. And so was the expectation tethered to it. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. The light was golden now, filtering in through the window over the sink. I opened the drawer where I kept unused greeting cards, birthdays, anniversaries, sympathy notes. I gathered them in a neat stack and slid them into a bag labelled Donate. Then I opened the cabinet where I had stored the mug, the one that said World's Best Backup Plan. I pulled it out, turned it over in my hands. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It just felt done. I didn't throw it away. I placed it back carefully, not in hiding this time, but in plain view, like an artifact of a version of me that no longer ran the show. Dinner was simple that night. Roasted vegetables, a slice of toasted sourdough, a soft-boiled egg, nothing special. But I cooked it for myself. On purpose. Not as a placeholder for someone else's plate, not in anticipation of a call, a knock, a favour waiting, just one plate, one fork, one chair. As I sat down, a thought flickered through me, gentle but profound. I wasn't alone, I was simply by myself. There's a difference. Alone is waiting for someone to return. Being by yourself is choosing presence. For the first time in years, I wasn't listening for the phone to buzz, wasn't watching the inbox, wasn't tracking someone else's chaos in the background of my peace. I took a bite, savoured it. I chewed slowly. No one to impress, no one to serve. And that feeling that used to haunt me, the one that whispered, "You're selfish for keeping peace to yourself," was gone. It had been replaced by something warmer, not joy, not yet, but space. Spaciousness, like my life had finally grown large enough to hold only what I invited in. And tonight, that was me, only me, and it was enough. That Sunday, I set the table. One plate, One linen napkin, one fork, carefully polished. A wine glass that hadn't seen use in years, not since the days when I planned dinners for 10 but always ended up cooking for 12. The apartment was quiet, not the kind of quiet that holds its breath waiting for noise, but the kind that settles in your chest and stretches out like a cat in the sun. I lit a candle, not for ambience, for myself. I sliced the chicken, roasted with thyme and lemon until the skin crackled under the knife. Plated it next to sautéed green beans and a baked sweet potato, split open and steaming, a pat of butter melting slowly into orange flesh. I poured a glass of red wine, something medium-bodied, nothing extravagant, but it breathed well, and I sat. Not rushed, not distracted, not checking a phone or juggling someone else's mood. I ate slowly, deliberately, and for the first time the food tasted like a celebration, not of an occasion, but of existence, of being here, of stillness, of space. I used to think these kinds of moments would feel empty, that without voices and clinking plates and someone asking for salt, dinner alone would feel like punishment. But it didn't. It felt earned. I took a second bite, and my eyes caught the reflection in the glass cabinet. Just me, barefoot, relaxed shoulders, no apron, no timer ticking, just presence. And I smiled, not out of joy, out of recognition. This was what peace looked like when no one was pulling on it, when no one needed something from you to justify your seat at the table. The golden glow of the overhead light washed over the oak surface I'd refinished myself 2 winters ago. I traced the edge with my fingertip, remembering the grit of the sandpaper, the scent of the varnish, the satisfaction of watching something transform, just like me. As the last of the wine swirled in the glass, I leaned back and let the quiet fold around me. Then, out of nowhere, a voice echoed in my mind. My mother's, soft and coaxing. "You're the steady one." It used to feel like praise, like identity. But now? I smiled again, smaller this time, softer. "Yes," I whispered to the empty room. "For me. Not for them. Not anymore." I stood, cleared the plate, rinsed it in warm water, and dried it with the towel Mum embroidered back in '92. I folded it, placed it gently in the drawer, and turned off the kitchen light. Behind me, the table glowed under the candle's final flicker. One seat, one story. Finally mine.